A reading from the Hebrew Scriptures. The same night he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, yet my life was preserved." The sun rose up upon him, and he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church.
Would the words from my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God. Amen. Do you remember the last time you had a sleepless night? Not the fun kind of sleepless night. I'm referring to those nights where you begin with every intention of sleeping, only to toss, turn, maybe even pace, as time melts off the clock that you just can't help to keep checking. Perhaps it was the night before a medical procedure, or an uncomfortable reunion, or the night that began as you lied in bed, finally realizing what you should have said earlier that day. Or maybe it was after a 10 p.m. bowl of pasta. Or maybe even after you decided that since you preached the gospel lesson from the week's lectionary 3 years ago, it might be fun to use the text from the book of Genesis, only to realize that this is not a text that youth ministers should be allowed to preach while their mentors are on sabbatical, hypothetically speaking. Regardless of how and why you get there, there's no denying that unlike the hustle and bustle of our days, where we are bombarded with tasks, messages, screens, needs, wants, voices, and sounds, in the middle of the sleepless night, there's nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. If you, like me, have had your share of sleepless nights, well, we certainly wouldn't be alone. Some incredible heroes have been well known to have their share of sleepless nights. Mark Twain, Vincent van Gogh, Judy Garland are all documented insomniacs. Abraham Lincoln had such trouble sleeping at night that he became known for his long walks at midnight while in office. Did you know that? Lincoln once said, "I could not sleep when I got on a hunt for an idea until I had caught it. And when I thought I had got it, I was not satisfied until I had repeated it over and over again until I had put it in language plain enough, as I thought, for any boy I knew to comprehend." Sleepless nights. The times when the answers don't come easy, and oftentimes the moments between what once was and what is to be. This is exactly where we find Jacob today, when at the beginning of a night's sleep, he was attacked by a stranger. Now, tempted as I may be to envision God in muscular form with stretchy pants and face paint, accompanied by Jerry the King Lawler, set for an all-nighter dose of WrestleMania, when you look at the book of Genesis and really the entire Hebrew Bible, there's a much more compelling case to assume that the Jewish and early Christian readers of this story understood Jacob's struggle to be emotional or intellectual and even spiritual. Walter Brueggemann wrote about this story in the context of the book of Genesis. In the night, the divine antagonist tends to take on the features of others whom we struggle in the day. Did you catch that? We are told that whatever form God, the divine antagonist, takes is what Jacob struggles with during the day, and we are told that Jacob and his antagonist wrestled all night, with neither able to achieve even the slightest advantage. Could it be then that as Jacob wrestles with God, he is ultimately, with God's provocation, struggling with himself? But why would Jacob need to struggle with himself? He's in the Bible, right? What could be that bad? Well, the more we understand about Jacob, the more we understand why this may indeed be the case. We actually know a lot about Jacob from the very moments of his birth to the very moments of his death, more so than any other character in the Bible. And from this, we see that from the very beginning, Jacob was not comfortable with his identity. Jacob, which in Hebrew could be translated to mean heel, manipulator, trickster. Seems like a rough start for a kid to be given such a name, right? Now, I understand the pressures that come with naming a baby. I mean, I've only had to do it once, and we took the easy way out and gave her names that already belonged to other people. I heard this story of a mother who fell into a coma as she was giving birth to twins, and the only person around to name her children was her brother. When the mother came out of her coma to find she had given birth and that her brother had named the twins, she became very worried because he wasn't a very bright guy. She was sure he had named them something absurd or even stupid. When she saw her brother, she asked him about the twins. He said, "The first one was a girl. What did you name her?" "Denise," he answered. "Oh, wow, that's not bad. What about the second one?" she implored. "The second one was a boy." "Oh, and what did you name him?" "The nephew." Jacob was a twin. And Jacob's mother, Rebekah, could literally feel the two babies struggling with each other inside her. But the story makes it quite clear that Jacob's name was earned before it was given. Because we know that when Jacob's brother Esau, the eldest, was being born, Jacob, this heel, this manipulator, this trickster, was so unwilling to concede the birthright belonging to the firstborn that he was holding on to Esau's leg as he was coming out of the womb. The problem with birthrights is like the problem with a name. After you're born, there's little you can do about it. But this wasn't good enough for Jacob. And so years later, when he encountered his beefy, bulky brother Esau, who had been starved for days, Jacob, this heel, this manipulator, this trickster, tricked Esau into trading his birthright in exchange for a bowl of soup. Years after that, when Jacob's father was blind, dying, and ready to bestow the blessing upon Esau, his firstborn, Jacob, this heel, this manipulator, this trickster, went up to his father and pretended to be his older brother so that he would receive the blessing instead. Having then severed his relationship with his brother, he went on to Aram, where he fell in love with a lovely young woman named Rachel. Having no means to compensate Rachel's family for marrying her, Jacob agrees to work for her father for 7 long years of egregious labor. But after 7 years of hard labor, after a few too many drinks, one might surmise, Rachel's father deceitfully sneaks in Rachel's sister Leah into the ceremonial sealing of the marriage. It appears that finally, in a plot twist worthy of American reality television, Jacob had been out-heeled, manipulated, and tricked. But you know what Jacob did then? He agreed to work and toil the land for 7 more years, and at the end of 14 years, he was proud husband of both Leah and Rachel. I met a man once who told me that he and his wife had been married for 14 years. Feels like 14 minutes, he said, underwater. You know, there's something noble about Jacob, not just in this story, but throughout his whole life. And sure, I might have traded a little more to my brother for more inheritance than just a bowl of soup, maybe a chicken Caesar salad or something. But throughout Jacob's whole life, there seems a dissatisfaction with who he is, or at least where he is in life. But rather than cursing God or giving up, Jacob is willing to do whatever it takes to change his lot in life. Kind of American dreamish, isn't it? And as Jacob's life has progressed, he seems to have embraced hard work as a means of accomplishing his desires. Maybe he's figured out how to be in control of his destiny. As a matter of fact, as we pick up this story this morning, we are joining Jacob on his way back to mend the burnt bridge with his brother Esau, who, for all Jacob knows, is out to kill him. But none of us are able to make a complete healing through transition, I think, until we fully confront the way it was and the way it is to be. Jacob is now forced to reconcile his past and his future, reconcile the chaos from which he came and the uncertainty of where he is headed. Everything about his future is unknown at this point. And I think he also has to admit it's seemingly beyond his control. Without a soul around him, we join Jacob in the middle of this sleepless night, caught in the struggle of what once was and what is to be, where there is nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. And herein lies the blessing of God's descending to be with him, to struggle with him, to wrestle with him that night. Brueggemann writes, to refuse to engage with God in that struggling moment denies oneself a God-given resource to go through it with God before we go through it with others, provides resources of strength and blessing for whatever lies in the wings of life. You know what's going on here? God has bigger plans for Jacob than Jacob has for himself. The land that had been promised to his grandfather Abraham, passed on to his father Isaac, the land that Jacob worried he had never earned or had squandered away, was to be bestowed to him by God along with 12 descendants that would be the 12 tribes of Israel. We are told he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. The stranger said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And a blessing he did receive. He was no longer Jacob, a heel, a manipulator, a trickster. He was Israel, follower of God, leader of humanity. How audacious, right? How bold. Jacob doesn't ask, he doesn't suggest, he demands the blessing that God has in store for him. Jacob boldly declared that this night-long struggle, this exhausting battle, this sleepless night was not to be in vain. Just last night, along with 6 others, Florida State alum and former Tampa Bay Buccaneer Derek Brooks was inducted into the Professional Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio, in a 5.5-hour ceremony that some of you might have watched on TV. Thousands of people gathered in the stands around him, and again, there were hundreds of thousands more that were watching from home as the jaw-dropping accomplishments and a career was recognized at the highest level that an athlete can achieve. Brooks was a 6-time All-Pro choice, named All NFC 8 times and selected to the NFL's All-Decade Team of the 2000s. And you know what? None of that matters to Natasha Spencer. Natasha is not impressed with Derek Brooks' 14-year career in which he never missed a game. She's not impressed by his 900 tackles, nor is she impressed by his 25 interceptions. This is not to say that Natasha Spencer is not a fan. She might be Derek Brooks' biggest fan. What impresses me, says Natasha, is that when he was growing up in the impoverished ghettos outside of Pensacola, raised by a single mother, tempted in neighborhoods riddled with gangs and violence, he chose to stay at school studying or practicing until the janitors kicked him out. What impresses me is that when he was tempted by the struggle of ego on his college campus, it was still more important for him to be known by his faith as opposed to his actions. What impresses me is that when he had all the money he needed to buy the whole world and faced the temptation to turn away and the struggle of superstardom, he decided to put it back into the community with programs targeted towards bullying, teen summits for middle school and high school students, employability programs, and prayer groups, where kids are even taken on field trips to museums, universities, and sporting events, even taking some of the children to South Africa. All of this free of charge. Says Natasha, who was a 12-year-old who met Derek Brooks as a part of a dropout prevention program at the Boys and Girls Club, and is now a 29-year-old doctor who graduated from the Florida State Med School thanks to a generous scholarship from Derek Brooks. I guess I'm mostly thankful and impressed that through all he worked for and through all that he struggled through, he grabbed on to God tighter than any opponent he ever tackled. Of all that Jacob accomplished, achieving the inheritance of the firstborn, receiving the blessing from his father, working hard to faithfully earn his family as the patriarch of the 12 tribes of Israel, perhaps the greatest accomplishment of Jacob's life was digging in during the sleepless night and grabbing on to God until the blessing was revealed, until that new name had been given. I don't know what keeps you up at night. Maybe your sleepless nights come in the middle of the afternoon or first thing in the morning. Wherever it is that you find yourself where there is nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Those moments when you struggle with life as it is and life as it should be. Perhaps it's in the discernment between what your life was and what your life is to become. Perhaps it is in those moments when you feel conflicted between what you and I have made our lives to be, as opposed to what God might be calling us to be next. And perhaps it's when you turn on the television, pick up the newspaper, overhear a conversation about worldwide chaos and violence in the Middle East, increasing anxiety in our communities and decreasing stability all around us. Those moments when you are a sleepless night struggle between what is and is to be. But I do know this. In those sleepless nights lies the blessing that, as it was for Jacob, God's plan for us is bigger than our plan for ourselves. Our sleepless nights are not to be in vain. So let us be leaders to engage and embrace God. For to refuse to engage with God in the struggling moments denies ourselves a God-given resource to go through it with God before we go through it with others, provides resources of strength and blessing for whatever lies in the wings of life. May we, like Jacob, faithfully, courageously, fiercely hold on to God with the assurance that no sleepless night comes without its blessing. Until we are struck, until we are blessed in ways that strike our hips, in ways that strike our hearts, and reveal to us the provision better than what we had anticipated for ourselves, our community, and our world. Because God knows it's going to be good to get some rest. God, what has been said is nothing but words on crumpled up pages. Take my imperfect words and the intentions of the scriptures and mold them as you will into faithful peace and faithful action. Amen.